our porch lights on because of masks and guns. We take video. Don't invade the winter people in the winter. Fundamental protections pertain here. You're on our watch. We've got signal chats. We know where they attack. We take video. We do a diaper drive. We give the children rides. We take video. Don't invade the winter people in the winter. Fundamental protections pertain here. You're on our watch. All that you have is your soul. 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 Don't invade the winter people in the winter.
Thanks to Violet Wild for that very appropriate introduction to our program today, Minneapolis, the people that inspire us. My name is Lorna Hilliard. I am from Wisconsin, just north of Milwaukee, and I'd like to introduce to you Therese. Therese.
Hello, I'm Therese Flaherty from Philadelphia and from the Elders for Sound Democracy. My privilege to help with this program today. And I will tell you that every now and then some of us inadvertently bring along note takers, AI note takers, and I will be throwing you off if you do. We do, I'll just your note taker, not you. We welcome everyone, and we will very likely send out a recording after this, along with the wonderful materials and resources that you've been seeing today. So you won't miss anything important, I hope. Thank you.
And I'd like to welcome all of you. It's good to see you. Good to have a big group today. If this is the very first community meeting from Elders for Sound Democracy you've been to, give us a wave. We like to acknowledge you and give you a special greeting. Good to see you. And if you've been to other community meetings, you can give a wave too, because we like to see you again. So you can wave again. It's good to have all of you with us for this program. This program is brought to you by Elders for Sound Democracy. It's a project of Elders Action Network, a nonpartisan community of elders who are taking action to create a better world for future generations and all of life. We are concerned about what we see happening all around us, and we are doing something about it. Elders for Sound Democracy is here to protect and strengthen democracy now and for the future. Today, our program is about Minneapolis, and we have all heard the news, and we've seen the video of the over 3,000 federal agents in their military gear and masks in the city of Minneapolis. in residential neighborhoods. It was called Operation Metro Surge. It was an invasion. We heard the stories of inhumanity. We saw with our own eyes the murders. We felt the fear and were angry right along with those in Minneapolis. So much of it didn't make much sense. How could this be happening in our country? And we need to acknowledge all of that. We've heard all the stories about what had happened. But there are other stories. Stories that didn't make the news, stories that we have not heard enough about. And those are the stories that we're going to share with you today. These are the stories of a resistance that has been sustained, nonviolent, and grounded in the love of their neighbors and their community. These are the stories that inspire us and make us ask what kind of nation we want to have. So today, we will talk about the humanity, about the compassion, the caring, and yes, the bravery, the creativity, and the human rights. First, I want to invite Lynn Iser to share some of her thoughts. Lynn has been instrumental in creating a vision for this program and is the past president of Elders Action Network. Lynn.
Hi, thank you, Lorna. Thank you, everybody. Joanna Macy used to exclaim, "We are living in the most exciting time in the history of the world." But for many of us, we feel the chaos, the uncertainty, the despair more than the excitement. We ask ourselves, what should I do? How should I respond to the challenges of the world? There's so much to do, but one thing I know for certain, we must take every opportunity to reconnect, to remember we are part of the living, breathing system of life called Earth. We must reweave our web of life that has been and is being torn apart. Not one web, but the many interconnecting webs of relationships, of intelligence, of creativity. We can learn from what was done in Minneapolis. When the people sensed a great outside threat to their neighbors, they came together and worked to rebuild and to strengthen the threads that held their communal well-being together. They made sure that children got to school safely. They shopped for their neighbors. Defiantly, they stood together in the face of abuse of power, blowing the whistles and caring for each other. It is a sad fact of modern life that our government, that is meant to care for our common welfare, is distracted with caring for the powerful and the wealthy. But we care. That's why we're here today. That's why we're a part of Elders Action Network. We know that caring, sharing, cooperation, all that Mr. Rogers stuff is what will sustain our lives as we go forward. What happened in Minneapolis is unfortunately not an isolated incident. We expect that it will happen here in Philadelphia as a means to disrupt the midterm elections, and it's now happening in many, many more places in the country. So let's pay attention to consider how these stories, these lessons can help us in our own communities, in our own neighborhoods, so that we can create a more thriving and just world for those we love. And thank you to the people of Minneapolis, and thank you to all of you for showing up today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. We are fortunate to have 4 panelists that are all from the Minneapolis area, and we're about to hear what it was like to be in this city under siege. Each of the presenters brings a different experience and a different perspective, but they all bring us inspiration and are models for a way forward for all of us. So as you listen to their stories, think about the lessons that we can learn, the lessons that we can take back to our own communities. After their presentations, we'll have a Q&A. So please drop your questions in the chat, and Therese is going to be monitoring the questions. So the chat is right at the bottom of your screen, and you can just put your questions in there. Now, I would like to introduce the panelists and hear a little bit about their experiences. We're going to start with Pam Costain. It's good to see you, Pam. She is a lifelong social justice activist. She has led several nonprofits, including the Resource Center of the Americas and Wellstone Action. She was elected to the Minneapolis School Board and is the grandmother of 4 boys. So Pam, you live right in the middle of the action. Can you please tell us what it was like?
I certainly can, and I want to thank Elders for Sound Democracy for this opportunity. There are thousands of stories to come out of Minneapolis, so I'm just going to tell you one. And I also want to acknowledge that this didn't start in Minneapolis, it started in Los Angeles. It was extremely difficult in Chicago, and many of the things we learned to do in Minneapolis, we learned from our colleagues in Chicago. So we owe a great debt of gratitude to people in Chicago. So I want to paint a little context for you here. Minneapolis, and this was throughout the state, but Minneapolis was hit hardest, is a city of 435,000 people, and we have a police force of 600 officers. When the surge started here, or as I like to call it, the siege, first 2,000 federal troops came in, and by the time they were done, it was over 3,000. So compare that to 600 officers in the Minneapolis Police Department. They wore combat fatigues. They were all masked. We could never see the face of any of them. They all carried sidearms, and they often carried automatic weapons. Their front was covered with pepper gas and tear gas and flashbangs and all manner of things that they would use to control the crowd. And so their presence was extremely threatening and looked, as you have said, like an armed occupation of our city. I happen to live in one of the neighborhoods where they were very prominent. It's a neighborhood very close to a high-density immigrant neighborhood, and they were driving down our streets in unmarked vehicles, no notification that they were law enforcement. Oftentimes they had out-of-state license plates. Sometimes these vehicles didn't even have a license plate, all of which is completely illegal. They were in our alleys. They were up and down our streets. They were circling our daycare centers, our schools, our food shelves, all the places that immigrants or immigrant children might be. I also want to let you know that I live a half a mile from where George Floyd was killed and less than a mile from where Renee Good was killed. So I already was in a neighborhood that was very traumatized, that's taken 5-6 years to come out of the trauma of George Floyd's death, and then to have these ICE agents in our midst was really quite frightening. But I want to tell you how we responded to it, because it was really quite a remarkable thing. We called ourselves ICE Out. It was all of us. It wasn't an organization. It was a movement called ICE Out. And people began to develop systems of responding to ICE. The first thing that some young people did is they went to where ICE was staging at a federal building, and they started collecting the license plates and the car makes and models of all the ICE agents because they were unidentified. Those were all sent into a central database. Then this central operations center, again, completely designed by volunteers, got all that information in, began collecting signal numbers of people who wanted to track ICE. And then as ICE began circulating in our neighborhoods, we had people we called commuters who started driving through our neighborhoods, and when they saw a vehicle that they suspected was ICE, a Suburban or an Explorer or something with an out-of-state license plate, they would call into a central database and they'd say suspected ICE activity, and that person would say if that license plate was in the database. Very sophisticated, very much led by a volunteer system. If it was identified as an ICE vehicle, then a rapid response signal was sent out to people in neighborhoods, and then people were asked to respond. So they might say, for example, ICE is at Park Avenue and Lake Street. And when you got that message, if you lived near Park Avenue and Lake Street, you got in your car, you threw on your clothes, and you went there. All we had was our commitment to nonviolence, our whistles, our phones to record what was going on, and frankly, our bravery, because we were either finding ICE, but more importantly, and this was essential, ICE was abducting people, and we were going to the place where they were abducting people. And we were blowing our whistles, tooting our horns, and sending them away. So it was very intense. A lot of this was done by younger people, as you can imagine. They were braver than some of the older people in town and more adept at scooting around in a car. But nevertheless, it was an incredible effort. And as a result of all of the documentation that was found in these arrests, which were then uploaded to a central database, the lawyers that are working on accountability have a record of what happened on our streets. In addition to this, just so you know, we also had, as was mentioned, protective presence around our schools. And for example, in my neighborhood, we have a public school and a parochial school. They're just a few blocks apart. The public school parents got organized. They provided a protective presence to the school every morning and every night. But then they realized that the parochial school, which was by and large Latino kids, and those parents could not come out. The public school parents walked then to the parochial school and also did protective presence there. So an interesting thing that happened over and over again is people created community or crossed differences that they had never crossed before. So the public school parents made friends with the parochial school parents, and then the parochial school started bringing Mexican chocolate out to the public school parents, that kind of thing. So there are so many examples of this that I could share, but this is what I'm going to call the civic resistance side of what we experienced. There are many other things that other people are going to talk about, but this was the way in which we actually confronted ICE, protected our neighbors when they were under immediate threat, and all the while maintaining nonviolence and civic resistance, but with an aim to drive them out of our community. And though they are still here in many diminished numbers, I would say we were successful. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you very much, Pam. That's amazing, just amazing. I'd like you to meet Catherine Ringham. Catherine is a retired gerontological social worker in the Twin Cities. She has been a leader in the Twin Cities chapter of Elders Climate Action and is currently on the Elders Action Network board. And she has 5 grandchildren who inspire her to make a better world. Catherine, you weren't right in the middle of it, but it found you, that action found you. Could you tell us about your experiences?
I would be delighted, and good afternoon to everyone. Pam, thank you so much for starting off with the nitty-gritty. That's exactly what people are on here to learn, and it really was graphic, and Pam did a great job on that. Minnesota has actually been through a lot in the past 6 years, some of which provided a foundation for coping with the ICE invasion. Yes, my neighborhood wasn't in the areas of the city most affected, but it definitely shaped our lives on a daily basis. We live 2 miles from the 2020 George Floyd murder site, as Pam alluded to, the 2025 school shootings at Annunciation School with 3 children deeply affected who live next door, and then the sites of the deaths in Renee Good and Alex Preddy. They are all in South Minneapolis, so that is close to my heart. And then, of course, Operation Metro Surge landed, which is now known as the largest immigration enforcement operation ever carried out in the U.S. Also in 2025, our chapter of Elders Climate Action deeply mourned the assassination of Minnesota Speaker of the House, Melissa Hortman, as we had worked closely with her to pass much needed climate policy issues in 23 and 24. In my own neighborhood, Many residents self-organized actions for vigils and get-togethers in the last few months. Our neighborhood has organized an email alert and information share email for years. So that came into play along with the list of all the who's who and contact numbers. One neighbor developed a petition, this was in the early days, to send to our mayor, Mayor Fry, entitled Neighborhoods of Minneapolis, Letters Against ICE, Unaccountability and Violence. And together we worked on the wording and lists of people for the email list across the city. Within a short period of time, we had over 700 signatures. Another neighbor, on another vein, invited all to a monthly craft and chat meetup at her home. And the goal was to enjoy each other's company. Still another neighbor, who was a piano teacher, opened her home recently for an evening of piano and cello music and poetry readings that were made by people in the community. And that also was a fundraiser for rent support. 3 of our 5 grandchildren experienced their first school walkout, and that has left an empathic mark. And like many others, we joined in the protest and a sit down at the Target store that was highlighted with the singing resistance. It was and is a busy time with protest options galore.
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's interesting. Our next presenter is going to be Susan Rainey, and I've known Susan for a couple of years, even though she lives in Minnesota. She grew up in Wisconsin, so she has been part of our Wisconsin team for Elders for Sound Democracy. She has worked at the University of Minnesota preparing K-12 teachers to teach foreign language and English as a second language. In retirement, she has tutored immigrant students and adult Afghan refugees. She's always been interested in working with immigrants. And she has joined the Grandmother Club too, with 2 beautiful granddaughters. Susan, how did you feel your way into getting involved?
So, yeah, I'm going to share kind of my personal story of someone who lives in the suburbs. So I was not in the thick of it in Minneapolis, but living in the suburbs, I felt outraged. I wanted to get involved. I eventually did find a way to get involved with delivering groceries, because that is one of the needs for people who are sheltering inside and not going to work. They are losing income, and they also didn't want to go out to the grocery store. So I've found a way to do that. But it was a long and complicated path to get there. And at first, I really couldn't see a way of doing things. So I thought, well, you know what? I'll just sit at home and donate money. And there was and is an ongoing huge need for financial donations. So donating to like organizations that help immigrants with their legal funds, and with rent subsidies, because so many people were not able to go to work, with getting food to them, and all of those kinds of things. So just donating money is like a huge thing that you can do without having to go out into the streets and so on. And it's probably the most impactful thing that I've done, even though I didn't give a huge amount. But I wanted to do grocery deliveries in the suburbs. So I started looking around. The school where I was doing some volunteering, they were collecting food. The families there were collecting food, and then the teachers were delivering it to the families. That district is very strict about keeping the boundaries between volunteers and families because of protocol. So I just worked through the teachers a little bit to give some groceries and some school supply books and things for the family that I had been helping. But then I also contacted a friend that I had met through the Women's March, and she heard about a network of people who were doing grocery delivery, just some people in the suburbs who were linking immigrants who needed groceries with volunteers. And so, and in this case, it wasn't through a food shelf. They just had the volunteer communicate directly with the immigrant and go and buy the groceries and deliver them to them. So you can understand in a situation like that, they really need to vet the people who are going to do the delivery and make sure that they're not bad actors. So I filled out a form and it asked for how did I find out about them? It asked for 2 personal references with phone numbers, and it asked for a Signal handle. And I had all those. I had already started a Signal account and I filled out the form. I didn't actually hear from them until much later. I found out that they had just been overwhelmed with the number of volunteers who were signing up. So, good news, but also the limitations of people trying to do this kind of on a just a personal, informal level. But then I saw a post on Facebook from a former student of mine. This person is now a teacher in the Columbia Heights district, and that's the district where little Liam Ramos was taken in his bunny hat. And so they have a large proportion of immigrants in their schools, and the schools, all 5 schools in the district have like huge programs to collect food donations and deliver them directly to families. And they were looking for drivers. So that's what I got involved with doing. And in that case, I didn't need other vetting because I had a person who could vouch for me and say that I was a trusted person. They didn't do training particularly, but I did ask this teacher, well, what do I do if I see ICE around? And they said, well, obviously you're not going to go ahead with the delivery, just come back to the school or whatever. And then she said, what they had been telling people was that if they were stopped by ICE, they should take those little pieces of paper that you have with the address and eat them rather than give them over to ICE. So that never happened. I don't know of any place. I haven't really been worried about that. But there is a level of secrecy and everything because, for example, when I sign up for when I'm going to do the deliveries, all of those lists are with first name and last initial only. You don't have the full name of the volunteer. And on the little slips of paper that you get for where to take the food, it does not list a name. So it's this complicated thing of trying to protect people by allowing them to stay at home and also be careful with the way that you're giving the food so that they don't get trapped in that way. So it's been an adventure. It's actually fun to be part of it.
Thank you, Susan. They're such incredible stories. And we're very lucky to have Robin Phillips also with us because she brings a little bit of a different perspective. Robin is an international human rights lawyer. It's good to see you, Robin. She is currently a senior advisor for an organization called the Advocates for Human Rights. After serving as its executive director for 23 years, she's also served as both the deputy director and the director of Women's Human Rights Program. She has taught courses in human rights law at the University of Minnesota Law School and the University of St. Thomas School of Law. So she brings something different. And can you tell us a little bit about your organization and about the role that it played and maybe is still playing with what happened in Minneapolis?
Thank you. And thank you all for being here. It's really a pleasure. And to bring the perspective of the organizations who were part of the movement, the organizations that were originally created to address the human rights needs that are being created by ICE, their operations in Minnesota, really, and around the country. It was inspiring to see the organizations expand to meet the moment, coordinating, supporting each other, and importantly, staying in our lanes. First, I'll tell you a little bit about the Advocates for Human Rights. We're a nonprofit based in Minneapolis. We were founded on the principle that we all have a part to play in making human rights a reality. We engage volunteers in all aspects of our work. Last year, a staff of approximately 40 people managed more than 1,800 volunteers. We represent victims of human rights abuses, but we also work to change the underlying systems of laws and policies that allowed the human rights violations to occur in the first place. Our priority issues are migrant rights, women's rights, LGBTQI plus rights, and due process and rule of law issues. We work internationally, nationally, and locally to promote human rights and the rule of law. Today, I'll focus on our largest program area, which is migrant rights. So for 30 years, we have provided free legal services to low-income asylum seekers, refugees, survivors of human trafficking, unaccompanied children, detained immigrants across Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And some of the ways that volunteers engage with that work, we have volunteers in immigration court monitoring the court proceedings, translating documents, providing critical administrative support, and volunteers actually beyond our organization, people were volunteering to meet individuals as they were returned from ICE facilities to make sure they could contact their families, that they had warm clothes, things. Some of the inhumanity included dropping people off without coats, without money, without any ability to access their families. So with Operation Metro Surge, the advocates, we increased our legal work both by challenging government policies and practices and expanding our representation of individuals. Before talking about some of the specific legal work that we did, there are a couple misconceptions that are pretty broadly held in the United States that I want to dispel first. The first being that the United States Constitution protects all people in the United States, not just citizens. The only exception spelled out in the Constitution is the right to vote. So these protections include protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, equal protection of the law, due process, all of those things. And they're not technicalities. They are the bedrock of our legal system. And when we look at what's happened in Minnesota, these are the rights courts are being asked to enforce. Also importantly, being out of status for immigration purposes is a civil infraction. It is not a crime. And that is something that a lot of the public information is really skewing, that they were not looking necessarily for criminals. And in fact, most of the people arrested and detained had no criminal record. So we're looking at some of the legal problems that occurred. Quickly, I'll just list a few. We saw many traffic stops conducted without reasonable suspicion, warrantless arrests of individuals at their homes, on their way to work, at sensitive locations, including near schools, use of force against bystanders, journalists, peaceful protesters, using chemical irritants, flashbang grenades, and long-range acoustic devices, detention of U.S. citizens, including Native American people, legal permanent residents, and asylum seekers. As we all know, murder with the shooting of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. So there are a number of organizations. I want to just give a shout out to our Attorney General's office in the ACLU. The Attorney General's office has been bringing cases challenging the authority of Operation Metro Surge, the misappropriation of state resources, and other problems. The ACLU has brought First Amendment challenges to the treatment of protesters, cases alleging racial profiling, among other constitutional challenges to what's going on here in Minnesota. At the Advocates, our focus has been on protecting the human rights of refugees and immigrants here in our community. The first case challenged Operation Paris, which was an operation to re-vet individuals who had been given refugee status. So they have legal right to be here, and they've already been extensively vetted. And they were focusing on about 5,600 individuals. They arrested many. They were detained first at the Whipple building and then brought to Texas before they were given a chance to talk with their attorneys. And with this, we brought a case requesting an injunction to stop the government from doing this doing Operation Paris, we were able to get a preliminary injunction, which was thrilling and is really one of the few orders the government has complied with. So as of today, all of the people identified in our original lawsuit have been returned to Minnesota and are back with their families. The second was challenging the immigration services blocking access to attorneys. It's important, I think I mentioned that being out of status is a civil infraction, so individuals are not guaranteed the right to counsel as people are in criminal cases, but many had private attorneys, and the advocates, the Immigrant Law Center, MMLA, the Mid-Minnesota Legal Assistance, we all provide lawyers to indigent people, so we have resources for people that they were being denied. They were not allowing in-person visits. They did not allow phone calls, and then transferred people before they even had a chance to consult with their attorneys. And this, we also sought an injunction, and fortunately were granted a preliminary injunction. And interestingly, a Trump-appointed federal judge issued an order requiring DHS to provide detainees access to confidential calls, in-person attorney visits, and wait at least 72 hours before transferring anyone out of state. And I'll read to you a quote from that order because it's one of the things that gives me hope. And the judge said, "It appears that in planning for Operation Metro Surge, the government failed to plan for the constitutional rights of its civil detainees. The government suggests, with minimal explanation and even less evidence, that doing so would result in chaos. The Constitution does not permit the government to arrest thousands of individuals and then disregard their constitutional rights because it would be too challenging to honor those rights." So we're happy to see that, and a strong declaration of what the rights of these individuals are. And then most recently, we just filed a case challenging the closing of immigration court proceedings and at the Whipple building. They're locking the doors. They're not creating public dockets. And when they have created virtual hearings, they've blocked immigration observers out of the proceedings and have required immigration observers to wear identifying lanyards, which is not required under the federal regulations. And there are other additional restrictions on observers that they put in place. And we are, again, asking for an injunction to restore the public access. That's how the courts were set up. The law requires that they be open to the public, and we are pursuing that injunction as well.
Just real quick.
Oh, yeah. And lastly, just individuals. We are representing individuals in habeas petitions, which are really proceedings to challenge an individual's detention. And those have increased dramatically. In the prior 12 months before Operation Metro Surge, there were about 70 cases. And since Operation Metro Surge, there's more than 1,000. So I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time here.
It's all wonderful information. We so appreciate it because, we don't hear all those things too. So thank you very much, Robin. It's great.
Yeah.
So we've introduced all the participants of the panel, and it leaves me with so many other questions. So a couple of other questions. Pam, we're going to start with you because you have said something in your blogs that I just thought was really interesting. And that was that what happened in Minneapolis was leaderless and leaderful. And I think that's such an interesting phrase that you have said. Could you explain that a little bit, how that worked out in the community?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've been an organizer for 50 years, and I've trained literally thousands of organizers around the country. And this was the most remarkable experience of self-organization that I have ever seen in my life. We had a community of tens of thousands of people who found a place for themselves in this resistance, whether or not it was on the streets, in mutual aid, in protecting the community, in artistic expression. Thousands of people found a place for it. So I call it civil resistance, but also I say that it was leaderless because so much emerged from the grassroots to the top. I'm a protege of Senator Paul Wellstone. He was a teacher of mine in college. And Paul Wellstone always taught that change comes from the bottom up, change comes from the grassroots, and change comes from people who themselves can find solutions. And for me, this was the purest expression of that I've ever had in my life, which is I saw people figuring out what they could offer. And this was everything from physicians and nurses around and midwives around the community who said, children are not coming into our clinics. We are going to find a way to go to find those children. And they didn't do it with any fanfare. They certainly didn't do it with any attention on themselves, but they just did it. There were suburban women who came into the Twin Cities who did not have a relationship and developed relationships with our immigrant communities and spent time in their homes and played with their children and bought the food. So this is what I mean by leaderless. When people find their own leadership and we understand that everything everybody does contributes. It's not one person, it's not one organization. It's the collective effort of everybody that I think. And I call it leaderful because it's not that people didn't exert leadership. They did exert leadership, but they exerted leadership where they could do it. And as you know, Catherine pointed out, people in her neighborhood started finding 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 things to do. So I really love that about what we went through. And I think it has a lot of lessons for us going forward. I think we all know we are in the fight of our lives against authoritarianism. We are in the fight of our lives to preserve our democracy, and it's going to take a lot of grassroots creativity. We are not going to be saved by people in positions of power alone. It's going to have to come from the rest of us. So that's why I said leaderless and leaderful. I want to talk to you a little bit about money flow in this movement because it was very interesting. You know, we're used to giving our money to a worthy nonprofit. I ran nonprofits all my life. I love money coming into nonprofits. But what we saw in this situation was something very different. In my neighborhood, on one block, 2 sides of one block, we had connections to 6 immigrant families. So we decided early on in January that we had to raise money for those families. Rent was coming and nobody had worked since the beginning of December. And so my block alone, these are not wealthy people. These are people of, you know, just reasonable middle class means, raised in 2 weeks $30,000. We went out to our friends and our networks and we said, I need you to give me cash and I'm going to give that cash to a central person and that person is going to get the rent paid for 6 families. And at first people were like, what? Give me the name of a nonprofit. I need the 501c3 status. And we said, that's not the way this is going to work. We can't move money that quickly to funnel it through a nonprofit. And so what happened all over the city, and more than $1 million, probably $2 million by this time, has been raised in this way. And it's raised by people being in relationship with another person that they trust who's in relationship with another person they trust. This didn't go through banks. Money came through a GoFundMe, or somebody just sent me a check, but it went into my bank account, and then I put it back out as cash. And in some cases it was paid directly to the landlord. In other cases it was paid to the immigrant family and they paid their landlord. Again, all in cash. And it really has given me a lot of pause to think about the way money flows in our society and how much we set up maybe appropriate but barriers that don't allow money to get to the people who need it the most when they need it the most. So we had a meeting in my neighborhood this week. We paid for February and March rent for these 6 families. We also gave them some living expenses. Some of those families are now self-sufficient. Others have not been able to get to work with sufficient income to pay their rent. And so we are continuing to raise money. We've raised in a week over $5,000 to supplement rental assistance. And again, we are not unique. We are just one of efforts that came out of schools and daycares and churches and mosques and all kinds of things. We call this mutual aid. So it's not like giving to people because we have and they don't have. It's that we create a relationship with people and we give because we are mutually supporting each other. So I think the critical importance of mutual aid here is really something. And then I was just kind of end this by saying this really was the most impactful experience in my lifetime that I've had of humanity just stepping up with care and concern and compassion without any need to have that reflected back on them. Nobody knew you were doing it. Your name's not listed in a brochure of donors. You just did it because it was the right thing to do. And I've learned a lot from this, and I believe it is a model to go forward. Certainly not, it doesn't supplant our traditional nonprofits or anything, but it's really self-organization that is hyper-local, that is relationship-based and built on trust. And I loved it, and I'm really glad to have been part of it. So thanks.
That's an interesting part of the importance of trust in there too. That's interesting. Robin, you're coming from a very different place because you're an organization, you're a leader, but your organization says that we all have a part, we're all advocates for human rights. So could you just explain help us understand how we can be advocates for human rights too?
Sure. As you stated, we were founded on this principle that we all have a part to play, and we take really seriously our responsibility to provide those opportunities to people, both because it helps us really leverage the cash budget that we have. Last year, we had a budget of about $4 million, and we leveraged that into over 20 million of human rights services. And we're able to get more than 1,800 volunteers mobilized, which is great. And people did things from working in the office to taking a case, last year not to the Supreme Court, but in past years, but taking federal court cases. And there are things, like I mentioned, that people can do with other organizations, meeting people when they're returned, in addition to all of the many things that my fellow panelists have mentioned. All of these things are human rights work. We're meeting the basic human rights needs of people: food, shelter, education, the right to security, to be safe. All of these things are equally important as the legal constitutional rights. And so we each of these pieces come together, and we value all of them. And it's been interesting. Almost every person I've spoken with about in Minnesota has said they don't think they're doing enough. And that makes a lot of sense when there's so much suffering and it's not finished. The problem hasn't been fixed, that nobody feels like they've done enough. But I think when we put all the pieces together, each piece is really important. And I think for people in other parts of the country, first, just honor what you've done to build a strong community. The faith communities, the nonprofit organizations are there because you invested in them. The schools, all of the parts that make the community strong, people have invested in. And so feel proud of that, because that's ongoing human rights work to make sure that we can meet the needs in the community. And then look at what you can do. Not everyone can stand outside for 3 hours. Not everyone can do certain things either because they don't have the resources to do it or they don't have the interest, but every piece matters. And so whether it's bringing food to the food shelf so they're stocked, helping at the school, if you're a lawyer, taking a case or providing advice on a case. There are lots of things. We had, as I mentioned, over 1,000 habeas petitions filed. And these are people who are doing this on a volunteer basis. We have staff that support them and train them, but they're taking time out of their other practice in their personal lives to make sure individual people are protected. And that's really important as well. But each piece really matters, and each piece is an important human right or addresses an important human right that should be protected. So
Thank you. That's really interesting. And I'll tell you that elders are great volunteers. So here
well,
we
I would say we have a lot of retired volunteers and they do amazing work. We're very, very grateful.
Catherine has brought us something today. She found that there was so much creativity, and that creativity brought people together in special ways and helped form that community. And Catherine has brought some slides with us. Catherine, do you want to head into that? We're running a little bit out of low on time, so we'll go kind of through them, but here you go.
Okay, so when people hear the word resistance, they often imagine marches, megaphones, and signs, and that is all things that really matter. But here in the Twin Cities, we've also been seeing something else emerge, and you can forward the slide. And that is called creative resistance. Sometimes it's called artivision or craftivism, which is resistance expressed through art, humor, culture, and mutual aid. These creative practices do four things. Number one, they build solidarity and win the hearts and minds. Number two, they communicate messages widely. They help communities hold on to joy, identity, and humanity, and they help raise resources along the way. And while Minnesota has shaped its own resources, as others have mentioned, we've built on the lessons of the other cities who have been struck by ice, as well as a few with an historical background, like the singing resistance and the red knitted hats that were resurrected here. All of this activism just gives a counterweight to the events that are going on in the streets and the homes of Black and Brown people all over the state. Movements create symbols that communicate values instantly. And one of those is our loon, our state bird that you saw before, playful but powerful. It signals that this movement is rooted right here in local communities. Simple visuals like buttons and posters are seen in neighborhoods, on lawns, windows, backpacks, jackets, and they send a quiet but powerful signal that people are not alone and resistance is everywhere. The monarch butterfly also serves as a powerful symbol of immigration, resilience. It represents the migration of people across borders without authorization, and it highlights the strength, cultural heritage, and the journey of immigrants and migrants. And when these images appear again and again on storefronts, telephone poles, even the landscape can become a canvas. On frozen lakes visible from above, communities created messages of solidarity. We used our own ice to our advantage. At Bede-Makaska, hundreds gathered with candles to form a giant SOS. In St. Paul, a group organized to spell Min over ice alongside a Hmong heart symbol, which honors one of the state's most vibrant immigrant communities. So these moments transform ordinary places into community engagement. At events like the Luminary Lapuk, there were ice sculptures and ice snow sculptures dedicated to the memory and the honoring of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. In fact, humor also came along with the ice invasion, and this was learned from Portland, etc. Humor or tactical frivolity diffuses tension and challenges the narrative that the protesters are dangerous or extreme. Humor is a way of saying our communities will not be defined by fear. The red hats were inspired by a local knitting shop who put out the pattern to the community after a staff member came across the Norwegian history that the red hats were used during the Nazi occupation during World War II as a mark of resistance, and now they have spread across the globe. At Powderhorn Park in Minneapolis, protest signs became sleds on the hills after a march, and the annual art sled rally event turned into a joyful time of protest. One participant said, It's a beautiful mashup of the Minneapolis spirit, protest, art, community, color, laughter, creativity, and activism all together. So these tactics do important work because they lower barriers to participation. People who might feel intimidated by a protest can show up and feel welcome. They attract media attention. A protester with a frog costume is probably going to get photographed. And they disrupt authority without violence. They remind us that even in difficult moments, communities can still hold on to the joy. Creative resistance in the form of music and poetry has always helped movements carry stories, mourn losses, and imagine a different future. And they raise money to boot. Examples from Minnesota include certainly the Singing Resistance Group that began in January and grew like Topsy. They show up and bring songs to events, protests, and gatherings. Notably, some new protest songs were created by local, national, and international musicians. There was, for instance, Bruce Springsteen with The Streets of Minneapolis. There was Brandi Carlile, who involved the Singing Resistance to sing It's Okay to Change Your Mind. And the concert ended with the members of the Singing Resistance on the stage. Brass bands and drummers show up in cold as musical witnesses. And this is key because movements need more than strategy. We need a community with a shared voice of music. Indigenous communities led with powerful traditions of healing. Our local Ojibwe community brought forward the jingle dress dancers who performed a traditional ceremony believed to bring healing to those suffering at all of the memorial sites. And young Indigenous activists established a prayer camp with 14 teepees and fire pits outside the Whipple ICE Detention Center to pray for families impacted by the ICE detention. They protested the immigration enforcement, and they reasserted the Dakota sovereignty over the sacred land. So these practices all remind us that resistance is not only about action, it's also about healing. And this photo represents because Alex Preddy was a passionate cyclist, the biking community organized an 8.3-mile bike ride in Minneapolis to honor him and raise funds. Thousands joined in the 10-degree weather. Many wore yellow vests that read, "Peaceful Observer, Don't Shoot" on the back. It was both a memorial and a message. It is estimated that there were over 250 similar rides for Preddy in 14 countries that same weekend. Creative resistance also shows up in economic and cultural solidarity. There's the daily, well-organized, peaceful protest on street corners, bridges, and school walkouts. The largest protest was the massive one-day strike involving labor unions, faith communities, health workers, and elders for a day of truth and freedom. The centerpiece was a 24-hour boycott on work, school, and shopping. 50,000 Minnesotans showed up in multiple layers and signs on one of the coldest days of the season. On the same day, over 100 religious leaders committed mass civil disobedience at the Whipple Center. And boycotts emerged centering on businesses who were complicit with the ICE work. A salt campaign at a Target involved people purchasing one container of salt, which of course melts ice, and then immediately getting back to return it over and over. And getting towards the end here, but no sleep or wide awake protests began to crop up in Minneapolis in December. The noise protests were largely organized by the University of Minnesota students and the Sunrise Movement that created sonic warfare at night by banging pots and pans, drums and horns against ICE near hotels where the agents were staying. And these actions transformed resistance into a single moment, into an ongoing practice. One of my favorite visual elements in the protest marches was the large facsimile preamble to the US Constitution that carried messages from Minnesotans. It featured the text, "We the people," to highlight demands for due process, free speech, and the protection of immigrant communities. And with the butterfly here, 1,100 people organized by an arts collective came together to make a butterfly that came alive in the Minneapolis park. It was called the Kaleidoscope of Love. So that's a little bit of what some of the creative actions were that really, as I said, led a counterweight and a balance to all of the horrific negative actions that were going on in the streets.
That's really wonderful. It's so good to see those images. Susan also has firsthand experience with some of the creativity and how that brought some joy and community to you. Can you explain how you got involved in that?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I've been thinking about, there's a couple of quotes that I've seen a lot lately. One is from the poet Tori Derricott, "Joy is an act of resistance." And the other one is a Martin Luther King quote, "Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." And I mean, I think the singing resistance that Catherine talked about has just been one of the groups that's really inspired me. And I actually just joined the local chapter of a singing resistance in Plymouth, Minnesota. And they are opening up chapters all over the country. So, I mean, this is something that you can access many different places. But I was so impressed with them when they went out. They got hundreds of people out in the streets outside of a hotel where ICE agents were staying, and they got them to sing that song. It's okay to change your mind, show some courage, leave this behind. You can join us anytime. That was the message to the ICE agents. I thought it was a great way, a great message, even if it doesn't get them to leave their, jobs at this point. And it's been, inspired by other resistance movements, but also just being part of a group singing like that is so powerful. So like I went to an event that packed a church that holds like 1,600 people. And when you you learn the songs really easily. This isn't like a Messiah sing along. This is, you go, you don't know the songs, you don't need the words in front of you because they're simple songs and they teach them call and response. But when you hear that many people singing together, you feel powerful. It just is so inspiring and it gives you hope. And I also went to the Kaleidoscope of Love, the one that was in Powderhorn Park, where that butterfly that Catherine showed, that is 1,100 people just holding a placard over their heads. That's what formed the butterfly. So each person in there was just, standing up there holding this in the formation. And if you notice the word love on the ground be there, that was people who were dressed in black, who then laid down on the ground and formed the word love. And before they formed it, love, they formed it in 4 other languages: Dakota, Hmong, and Somali, and Spanish. So it was an amazing experience to live through. It was just really inspiring. And the thing was that it gives you this physical feeling of power, that you are part of something bigger and that you do have power against these forces that can just seem so ominous to us. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I took from it is that it's important to have fun and to find joy. And it's important to not only think about what we're against, but what we're for. And so this was all about love and solidarity and welcoming and so on. And then I had this little personal experience also. So they did the big butterfly formation. They also, the singing resistance was part of it. They had a leader getting people to sing together. They had poets. They had the Brass Solidarity Band, which is a wonderful group that brings together anybody with an instrument can come and play music together, very joyful music. But anyway, I went with my daughter, who is not one of the leaders of singing resistance, but has done a lot of things and knows the people in that group. And my daughter also writes and sings music. So we were standing around in the crowd before they were going to start the official program, and, a crowd of, a few hundred people or whatever. And my daughter said to a friend, I have a new song that I've written. I haven't taught it before, but, do you think I should do it? And they said, yeah. And so my daughter was not on the program, was not on the stage, didn't have a microphone. but started singing this song, which was in that mode of the singing resistance, of where you can just call out words and have people join in. And it was things like, "We are united, we won't be divided, we'll rebuild the world with love." And, so a few people around started singing along. And then I looked around and I noticed, like, there's 100 people or more singing this song. They've never heard it before. And we're all singing this song about rebuilding the world with love together.
Should we show the
So,
video, Susan?
yeah, so I grabbed my phone. This is just a very amateurish video.
Hey, together we'll stand. Hey, hey, to protect the ones we love. All of us now. Hey, hey, we're tearing it down. Hey, hey, to rebuild the world from love. People are rising. People are rising. People are rising. People are rising. People are rising up for love. We are united. We are united. Not be divided. Not be divided. We will build the world from love. You take my hand. You take my hand. Hey, hey, together we'll stand. Hey, hey, to protect the ones we love. All of us now. Hey, hey, we're tearing it down. Hey, hey, to rebuild the world from love. You take my hand. You take my hand. Hey, hey, together we'll stand. Hey, hey, to protect the ones we love. All of us now. Hey, hey, we're tearing it down. Hey, hey, to rebuild the world from love. All of us now. All of us now. Hey, hey, we're tearing it down. Hey, hey, to rebuild the world from love. All of us now. All of us now. Hey, hey, we're tearing it down. Hey, hey, to rebuild the world from love.
I can't watch that without a tear in my eye, I tell you. It just hits me every time. We have had just a delightful conversation, and we just had really wanted to hear from you. But Therese, do we have some questions that we need to get to?
Let me let everyone know a few things. First of all, my goodness, this has been an amazing sharing, at least for me. I want to continue this conversation, and I know many of you will want to. It is now 1:10 in the Central Time Zone, and we are committed to officially ending this program at 1:30 in the Central Time Zone. So there are a few things to think that I want to let you know. If you don't happen to get your question addressed, there are a few things we're going to do. We're going to take a few questions from the chat now. I'm just putting in the chat a link, which we'd love to know if you would like to continue this conversation in the future, either by getting some questions answered or by potentially, and we'll reach out to you, by following up. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your feedback, and there's a place to do it. We'll do a few Q&A at approximately so in maybe 10 minutes of Q&A. Then we're going to ask our panelists for one line apiece, only one line of what would you say to all of us who have been riveted by what you're speaking about? I will then take about 3 or 4 minutes to make our final announcements. Then we will stay on. I know many people are going to have to leave, and if you do, thank you for coming. We will be sending part of this as a recording later in the week once we do our editing. We'll also be sending a tremendous amount of resource material for all of you. And so I hope that will be useful. And we'll stay on. We'll leave the meeting open for I'll read through the chat so people who've actually put important questions in the chat will hear them, and we'll have an open conversation as well, depending on how that works logistically. So if you can stay, we'd love you to stay. Having said that, let me also say, I know there are a couple of questions in the chat about where can people send money to support rent and food in Minneapolis, and we have that website, which is supported by all of our panelists, and where you can see a few different places to send funding. I know the first question, I'm going back here. The very first question that I noticed comes from Wendy Barth, who I know lives in Rochester, New York, and she wants to know, what does a protective presence at a school mean? So could someone take that, please?
Maybe Pam?
Yeah, I think that's probably mine. So what would happen is a school community would organize parents and wider community members to have a presence circling a school, because ICE sometimes would circle the schools, intimidating people, in some cases literally kidnapping parents while they were dropping off their children at school. So in the morning when children were arriving, and in the evening, people built a protective presence. I would say maybe 10 or 12 or sometimes 15 or more people around a school watching ICE. If there was any indication of ICE activity, they would blow whistles and people would know to not drop off their child or whatever. I will say that ICE did attack one Minneapolis high school. My grandson happens to go to that high school. They arrested staff people who were trying to respond to this, and it was at the height of the worst of Greg Bovino's presence here. So it was necessary to protect our schools and our daycare centers. And so this protective presence went up around schools, but it also went up around, bilingual daycare centers or Somali daycare centers or Somali adult daycare centers. Mm-hmm. But it was literally a presence. My daughter works full-time as a teacher, but when she got done being a teacher, she showed up for another hour and a half protecting school presence. So that's the level that it was operating at. But it was organized, again, in a decentralized way by school communities.
And I must add that in our chapter, we have an 87-year-old member who did the school work every day, morning and night. He was just committed to that part of the struggle.
Wow, thank you. And we have another question. Wendy's been busy. I thought this was from a totally different angle. Robin, you said this was a federal judge who made these rulings. Does that mean that his decision and the injunction is enforceable and counts throughout the country?
So technically, the federal courts only have jurisdiction over their area. In the past, with federal actions, the government has responded by stopping, generally around the country, of course. That is not what this administration wants to do. So it's ongoing to see how that will have an impact around the country. But technically, in terms of jurisdiction, it's only within the district of the court.
Thank you. And could someone say what is Signal? Just because there may be some people here who don't know what that is. Could someone explain what Signal is and why you got the account?
Who wants to take that?
Well,
Susan, you want to do that?
I could talk about it because I have it. It's a texting app. And I got it because my daughter first asked me to get it, and you just get it on your phone by like putting on another app. But it's a protected. It's got the safety things built in, and conversations disappear after a while. And the tricky thing is, the fun and tricky thing is that you don't use your real name. You make a signal handle a funny name, and that's actually just kind of fun. Mine is Purple Lover.
I just want to clarify a little bit. It's an encrypted messaging system, so
Yeah.
it's presumably not able to be monitored by
Right.
federal authorities. The other thing is just, Susan, some people love this anonymity, but other people just use their name on it. They're like, what the heck?
Well, yeah.
I am what I am and I'm doing it. But you can either use a anonymous name or your
Yeah.
own.
And
But it's
just so you
encrypted.
know, a lot of neighborhoods, we've heard in Philadelphia that neighborhoods in Seattle organized signal groups just to be ready in case they needed to let each other know where they were, going to a demonstration, etc. And we have in our resources the how-to establish your own signal account and then get it started. So and I think I followed it. Must be somewhat self-explanatory. Um, and we'll be able to follow up on some of these. I'm looking. Pam, can you explain a bit? You can't do it in much detail because we don't have much time. This is going to be our last question now, but we'll come back after the break. Can you explain how you learned from Chicago and who was in charge?
Yeah, I'd actually be happy to do this. The group in Chicago that I think has done the most to help other communities is called Defend Rogers Park. They're part of a larger network called States at the Core, and they really have developed a very sophisticated way of training people how to track ice and how to build community around tracking ice. And I'm going to say this again, it's States at the Core, because tomorrow night at 6 o'clock they're going to do a training on that's called Beyond Ice Watch. I highly recommend them. But people from Chicago came to Minneapolis and trained people in Minneapolis in a group called Defend 612, which is our area code, how to monitor ice. And without them, we would have had to figure it out, from scratch. And instead, we used their model and implemented it here. Very, very grateful to Chicago.
Wow.
And I'm aware that Minneapolis has already sponsored a 1-week training for people across the country here in later February that was very successful, included going to events and going to some of the protests as a way of learning. So I think it's so great that the cities that have experiences are willing to share and the tips and resources. So yeah.
It is. And we, sitting in various cities across the country, we're very grateful that you're giving your time to us today, and we'll reach back. I wonder if I could ask each of you to give a final statement instead of the lessons learned philosophical thing we thought about. Could you give us just one final message? Pam, do you want to start?
I hope everybody is going to be out on March 28th at No Kings. We need everybody in the street. You can stand on your own street corner if you can't get to a big march, but do not miss No Kings on the 28th. We need to show that millions of people are against authoritarianism.
Thank you. Thank you. Catherine, you're nodding. And then maybe Robin and finally
I'll second
Susan.
that motion by Pam. That is a great idea. I'm so excited. And I think the whole country is expecting a huge, huge turnout. So that's going to be great. I'll just end with, this is from a Thomas Friedman opinion piece, that neighboring is a verb, and that Minneapolis is not splitting apart, we're locking arms. So I think the importance of getting to know your neighbors, finding out their phone numbers. It's a lot of things can be done ahead of time and in preparation for signal apps, etc. if needed.
Thank you. Thank you. Robin?
So I'll just echo Susan's joy as an act of resistance. We can't let them steal all our joy, and it not only sustains us, but the people around us. So thank you, Susan, for bringing that up.
And Susan?
Yeah, I think get to know your neighbors, but also think about your neighbors in a broad sense. Think about all of your connections and all that you can do, and find what works for you to do. But there are so many ways and we have power when we come together and do things together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I'm going to remind you that there is in the chat that place where if you're feeling it now, let us know that you would like to continue to be part of this conversation, which we'll be having at Elders for Sound Democracy. And that means not just this immediate moment, but as we go forward. Krista, would you put up my slides, please? I'm going to give you a very short so I don't know, closing, I guess. And
Therese, can I do a real quick thank
oh,
you?
sorry, Lorna.
No, but I just really have to thank these
Of course
participants
you
because
do.
they have done such a wonderful thing to share their experiences and their insights. And I think that also I have to thank you for what you've done in all your different ways, for what you've done for our nation, because you've shown us a way that I think we all can learn from. And I think that's really special. And I just did one more quote, Pam, in your blog, you said, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." And I think you've all proved that. Thank you. Therese, it's all yours.
Yeah. Now let's just take a moment and show our appreciation in our various little emoji things. There they are.
And I just want to say thank you to my fellow panel members. Robin, you must be so busy with the aftermath. For you, this is still going really strong. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And let me remind everyone, stay on if you can, after I give you 3 quick little slides from, how inadequate actions and lessons from Minneapolis. We're going to give you the recording and far more detail on lessons and resources you can use. And I'll just say our first one here is please attend the Nose Kings Rally on March 28th. Next slide. And we'd say also, please make a plan to mobilize voters in 2026. We're particularly interested in mobilizing the persuadable middle, not just the base, but we'd ask you to make a plan and let us know. We're going to be, again, supporting people who are mobilizing voters and defending voters' rights during this coming year. Next slide. We'll send you these slides. Don't worry about them. We'd say also, as you are thinking about the communities you join, think about meeting with like-minded elders. And we at the Elders for Sound Democracy have a few meetings where you're very welcome. We have a conversation for democracy, and we'd ask you to continue the conversation with us. That'll be next Wednesday, March 25th. You can just sign up on our website and we'll send you registration links in our little email later this week. We'll have another community meeting next month. It's going to be on the subject of disinformation with a gentleman whose name I will not butcher for you from the University of Washington, who is an expert on disinformation and how to counter it. And then finally, we do have our action teams. We have a voting action team, which meets on Tuesday next week, and a Defend Democracy action team, which will have its next meeting on Monday, April 6th. And you'll be able to register for all of these on our website, and we'll send you registration links. Next slide, please. Our last slide, which we don't actually need, as Crystal knows, is our commitment to being a nonpartisan nonprofit. This year, with the importance of nonviolent resistance, with the kinds of issues we're seeing, which are really not purely political at all, we believe that it's very important to be working, in addition to whatever partisan work we're all doing, to be working with the persuadable middle and hopefully working with people across the board to be good neighbors and to bring our society around. And we have just moved to, I'm just curious, we have a number of people who did have to leave. And for those, we're grateful everyone has come. Shall I take a couple of questions from the chat, Lorna, and then just turn it open? What do you think?
Absolutely. If there's some good questions, or if
Are
anybody
you
else has
muted,
questions
Lorna? You
now.
are frozen on my screen.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Here is,
Is it
Shell
on?
has a question. Therese,
Pardon me?
Shell has a question.
Oh, good. Well, why don't you recognize them?
Shell?
Yep, thank you. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. It's very inspiring. I have family who live in uptown Minneapolis, so they have been heavily involved in some of the support actions. This question has less to do with this presentation, but I have a project that I think I would love to partner with Elders Action on, and who is the best person to approach it? It's something that would engage members of the organization in shaping a book and also raise money for it without any output of money and create a lot of visibility. And I'm just wondering who's the best person to talk to about it.
Why don't Lorna and I get back to you?
Okay.
We'll send you an email.
Okay, great. And I saw your email address on the slide, so I'll zap
Perfect.
something out to you and we can be in communication.
Great. I have everybody's email address. As long as I have your name, I'm all powerful.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, shall we open the floor?
Well, here's Blair has a question too. So Blair, would you like to ask?
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks to everyone for all your work and for, making your presentations today. For the panelists, I was just curious, given your ages, whether you were also active in like the 60s and 70s or whether this was, sort of it was kind of returning to your roots, or maybe you've been active throughout your lives, or whether this was like really your first time getting involved in a way like this. Over. Thanks.
Who would like to take that on? Pam? Or Susan, would you like to answer that?
Sure. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin in the 60s and 70s. Yes. This definitely a part. And the thing I love, when I started getting into protests in recent years, I thought, hey, wait a minute, but they need to sing. We had to sing in the 60s and 70s. And now that's why I'm so excited about the singing resistance.
Pam, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I have been active since the war in Vietnam, through the Central America wars, through equity issues and that kind of thing. But what I would say to a group of elders is it's really important that we keep up our relationships with young people. One of the things I think we suffered from as young people ourselves, as an arrogance that we had nothing to learn from people who were older. I don't want to repeat that again. We have a lot to offer young people, and we have a lot to learn from their boldness and their just take no prisoners approach to social change.
Can you
Anyone
speak a little bit?
Yeah, and I could just add that I was more involved in the 80s and 90s with the anti-nuclear work that was being done and against cluster bombs. That effort, which really has served me well. So going forward and to do this work.
And Catherine.
I had part of my question was already answered, Therese, about the protective groups, but I had a question for Pam about the the public school districts' policies on ICE. Do you know what they were, and were these groups able to actually stop ICE from dragging people out of wait lines, out of schools, etc.?
So the Minneapolis Public Schools had a very firm policy of no ice in the buildings at every single school. So
Okay,
that was a district-wide policy.
okay, that's what I
The,
want to know.
the
Yeah.
protective presence was really self-organized, mainly by parents and community members. But what I will say is the district went very early to a hybrid learning, which is not great, but it allowed immigrant kids who are staying at home to continue to come to school. So the two policies were at-home learning, hybrid, and no ICE presence in the schools.
Yeah, and of course, as you know, that doesn't exist everywhere in the country. No
Right,
ICE in the schools,
right.
including Tucson, Arizona, Blue City. ICE is allowed to come in if they have a judicial warrant and no mask on their face.
Hmm, interesting. Therese, are there any more questions online on the Q&A?
I am looking. There, I think I'm going right through the last. There's so many expressions of appreciation. Uh, is there something special about Minneapolis that made this leaderless model of mutual aid and neighboring so powerful? Can it
I,
really work somewhere else?
and I know that Minneapolis is a leader in voting and also in volunteering. We rank pretty high. I think a lot of that comes from our German and Scandinavian background because they always do groups. So I think part of it is our heritage. Um, and also just a spirit in our state because we're very welcoming of immigrants and refugees. We have a lot of nonprofits that help set them up and integrate as much as possible. And I think that it just went against the grain to have these masked interlopers come in and say these horrible things when they called Somalis garbage, for instance. That just really was not, it really angered a lot of people.
I would say yes to everything Catherine said, and I would say this is possible everywhere. Again, it's built on personal relationships. It's built on reconnecting with one's community, whether or not you live in a high rise or you live alone or you, wherever you are, we can only get through. And again, I'm going to keep naming the authoritarian moment by building community with those of us who reject it. And everybody can do that, no matter where they live.
Yeah, I think our recent elections with the second generation or people who were immigrated from the Hmong and the Somali experience, for instance, coming here, we're just, the new mayor of St. Paul is Hmong, and Ilhan Omar is our representative to the Congress. So, it just goes, people admire the accomplishments of our immigrants and will not stand for putting them down like they have been.
I'd also add that, we also saw here, and it's easier to track, I think, from an organization that's existing, but probably Pam and others have seen this, that, donations came in from all over the country. We had calls from lawyers literally all over the world, but really all over the country saying, how can I help? How can I get engaged in a suit? What can I do? So they're everywhere. People who want to step up and give their time, give their resources. We had actually, I don't know who organized this because they didn't identify, but we got a large number of postcards to the office just saying, keep up the good work. We're with you in Utah. We're with you in Vermont, from places sort of all over the country. And it was really very heartening. And, people don't need to take their time to do that, and it's really, really nice that they do. So I think that we're seeing this building all over the country. So we'll see it again, I think, in other places.
I just have to add one more thing here. I was on a conversation with U.S. citizens who reside in Germany, and they're permanent residents of Germany, and there was 100 people in the audience. And what I said to them is, somebody who has worked on solidarity my entire life, whether or not it was with Vietnam or Central America or apartheid in South Africa, to be on the receiving end of solidarity, I cannot tell you what it meant. And just as Robin said, when somebody says thank you, they see you, they know how hard it is, it's immense. And I really cannot stress enough how much we need to say thank you to each other all the time for the work we're doing. It's not just those of us in Minneapolis. We need to thank people for the efforts that they're making to be good humanitarians and to save our democracy.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Jeff, do you have something to say?
I have a question, and that is, I do rallies all around, and one of the problems that I face is that there's those areas that are on the good side, and I go out and rally, and it's a love fest, just like many of the things that you showed. But sometimes I go to the dark side, and in communities where people want to choose me off right on the street or smack me in the face or who knows what, and that's pretty bad. And so my question for you is that I lived in Minnesota, by the way. I love Minneapolis. What wonderful people there. But my question about the experience in Minnesota was, I'm sure that there are more enlightened communities and more dark communities. But in the aftermath, in the what happened, were the maybe dark communities, did they just turn to the bright side? Or was there some type of filtering where you just kind of, well, we're trying to bring the community together, but we better avoid this district or something. So how did that work out?
I think there was resistance throughout Minnesota, just as there's resistance in all of your states. But there were also bad actors who were not ICE. There were Proud Boy types who came in
Yeah.
and did things, and we had to be a presence in front of them as well. One of the daycare centers, that is a Somali-run daycare center, was robbed. They were broken into, and their records were robbed by Proud Boy types. So yes, we confronted those people. But I also will say to you, as somebody who works with Indivisible, I really believe that our task is to bring everyone we can with us. And they may have
Yes.
voted differently in the last election. They may have, but if they're with us now, they're with us. We cannot divide along where were you then. It has to be where are you now.
Yeah.
Chris, any others?
I think I've been reading lots of wonderful, interesting comments, and but I don't see any truly new questions. So perhaps not too much over time. Would we, what would we ask
Well, I
for?
think this has been really fun to kind of continue our talk, our little chat, and I think it, just all of your presence and all of your comments have been so wonderful, and we appreciate it. Unless there's anything else, we'll say our goodbyes.
Right. We will say thank you to I would join with Lorna and say thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your wisdom. This is a great program, but more than that, it's a conversation that we need to continue. So we will be reaching out a little bit. And if you have any suggestions for us about, I saw there was one in the chat that someone else we should get in touch with. How do we keep this conversation going? Who else and what else should we be thinking about as we go through this year? So thank you. Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.